Protect Plus Gold, a broad-spectrum disinfectant, kills 99.9% of disease-causing germs and works in 10 minutes.
Hello, I'm Alma Angeles and you're watching Eagle News International.
Welcome to the program. I'm CJ Hero. Here are the headlines tonight.
The death toll after the collapse of a Florida apartment tower has risen to 9, according to the local mayor, more than 3 days after the building pancaked as residents slept.
Obviously, you're going to start to see a lot.
Surrender, give up your weapons, and the government will support you. President Duterte made the offer anew to new People's Army rebels, assuring them of free housing, financial, and food assistance.
And swathes of the United States and Canada endured record-setting heat, forcing schools and COVID-19 testing centers to close, and the postponement of an Olympic athletics qualifying event, with forecasters warning of worse to come.
And China's National Space Administration released new images from its Tianwen 1 Mars probe.
The death toll after the collapse of a Florida apartment tower has risen to 9, according to the local mayor, more than 3 days after the building pancaked as residents slept. Take a look.
We're able to recover 4 additional bodies in the rubble, as well as additional human remains. As of today, 1 victim passed away in the hospital, and we've recovered 8 more victims on site. So I am confirming today that the death toll is at 9. We've identified 4 of the victims and notified the next of kin. So we're cutting a deep trench to assist us. It's now 125 feet in length. Into the pile, it's 20 feet wide and 40 feet deep. Now, this trench is very critical to the continuation of the search and rescue process.
Obviously, you're going to start to see a lot of
The
major
12
debris. They're going to be moved out of there. There's a site
The 12-story oceanfront Champlain Towers South pancaked in the middle of the night on Thursday as residents slept. Many members of the local Jewish community were among those affected by the tragedy, and Israel had vowed to help with the agonizing search. About half of Surfside's population is Jewish, including many members of the Hasidic Jabed Lubavitch movement, according to Israeli media. Take a look.
We are the first, delegation to come here. It's not by chance, it's because we want to be first and we want to help as much as possible. This is our responsibility as human beings.
Now, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis told reporters on Saturday that local officials were considering potentially evacuating a nearby building that was built by the same developers around the same time. Take a look. As the collapsed structure. But he said there were no indications of immediate danger there. A study led by Florida International University found signs of land subsidence, a phenomenon affecting much of the Atlantic coast at the site in the mid-1990s. Mayor Cava said the county would immediately undertake a 1-month safety audit of all buildings 40 years or older.
Now, a huge blaze engulfs more than a dozen yachts in Hong Kong typhoon shelter. The fire department said it took 6 hours to put the fire out, adding that about 20 people were evacuated and a boy was sent to hospital. Some of the yachts in the Aberdeen Marina are occupied full-time by locals and expats. 10 boats sank, according to local media. According to the South China Morning Post, the fire was believed to have started at a barbecue one of the houseboats was hosting, and it quickly spread from west to east under a strong wind. An estimated 300 boats are moored on that side of the marina, according to residents there. Boat owners the Post spoke to said police and fire services were slow to act and took a while to organize the residents in the community. It took a resident blowing his horn very loudly to alert them to flee to safety, according to that source. Stephen Ho Chun-yin, lawmaker for the agriculture and fisheries sector, said the blaze should prompt the government to rethink the way it managed the city's marinas.
Surrender, give up your weapons, and the government will support you. President Duterte made that offer anew to the New People's Army rebels, assuring them of free housing, financial and food assistance in a speech delivered during the launch and oath-taking ceremony of officers of the Global Coalition of Lingkod Bayan Advocacy Support Groups and Force Multipliers at the Philippine National Police Multipurpose Center in Camp Crame, Quezon City. Take a look.
Ang deal ko sa surrender is, if you surrender, I will automatically give you a place to stay. Then I will send you to TESDA under Secretary La Peña. You learn the basics of whatever vocational study that you can be master. And after that, well, for the time being, I will pay you and I will support you with the food sustenance. Yun ang deal ko sa kanila. But surrender everyone. Drop the arms.
President Duterte said the CPP's Politburo, or the policymakers, are earning billions of pesos at the expense of poor NPA bandits. He said NPA guerrillas must be enlightened by the sad story of the CPP. Take a look.
They collect taxes, the NPAs, everywhere and anywhere. Sigurado ako, cement factories, in the far-flung areas of the country, Davao, lahat agricultural companies, nagbabayad sa kanila yan. You know, people must realize that the Communist Party of the Philippines has a broad taxation, and they collect taxes almost from the lowly farmer to the conglomerates. And we estimate, intelligence community, that they are earning, the Politburo earning billions of pesos, and yet their soldiers down on the ground are dying sometimes without eating a meal for 2 days. Yan ang hindi alam ng insurgents. Ang hindi alam ng sundalo ng komunista. Yan ang hindi alam ng mga civilian na ganun talaga ang palakad. While the Politburo's families and members and their children are all abroad enjoying the fat of the land from the Communist Party of the Philippines. Mga anak nila are studying in Europe, London. Some of them are traveling. The latest intelligence report was that a group of them went to Turkey upon invitation of the government, I think, of Turkey, and some of them have opted to study there. Yan ang hindi alam ng pobreng kawal ng sundalo. And this must be brought to light para malaman nila ang totoo.
The CPP-NPA is listed as a terrorist group by the Philippines, United States, European Union, United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand. On May 29, 2018, the Department of National Defense issued the implementing rules and regulations directing Task Force Balik Loob to enforce the Enhanced Comprehensive Local Integration Program, or ECLIP, the government's program for former rebels. Under ECLIP, former rebels will receive 15,000 pesos worth of immediate assistance, 21,000 pesos to defray the subsistence or meal cost, support to relocate and secure their family, 50,000 pesos livelihood assistance and other benefits like temporary shelter, Philippine Health Insurance Corporation or PhilHealth enrollment, modified conditional cash transfer, and medical, legal, and livelihood assistance.
Staying here in the Philippines, the Philippine National Police Chief General Guillermo Eleazar welcomed the concern raised by the Commission on Human Rights over President Duterte's suggestion to arm the police's partners in fighting crimes and terrorism. On June 25, the PNP launched the Global Coalition of Lingkod Bayan advocacy support groups and force multipliers that aims to build a strong collaborative partnership with the community in support of the ongoing campaign against criminality and terrorism. In his message, President Duterte declared he was open to issuing firearms to a group of volunteers to help government enforce law. Take a look.
You want to participate in the prosecution of the crime, you can have a gun, and if you're qualified, I will ask the police to give you the license. But please try to observe the law. If you want, you invite me once again when you are ready, and I will lecture to you the law on arrest, search, and seizure. As a policeman, yan lang ang ano. I was teaching criminal law, criminal procedure, criminal evidence during my prosecution days.
In a statement, the PNP chief said, "We understand the concern of the officials of the Commission on Human Rights, but we assure them that the president's suggestion is to encourage volunteerism and definitely not vigilantism." Eleazar also said Duterte's recommendation aims to protect the civilian volunteers against the criminal elements, including members of the New People's Army or the NPA, the armed wing of the Communist Party of the Philippines that is listed as terrorist organization by the United States, the European Union, the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and of course the Philippines.
Meanwhile, President Duterte's proposal to arm civilian volunteers in fighting crime is not a policy yet. That, according to Malacanang today. In a palace press briefing, presidential spokesperson Roque said, while President Duterte is open to that idea of arming anti-crime volunteers, the proposal still needs to undergo the process of completed staff work. Take a look.
Pero wala pa naman pong finality, no? At siguro the best view expressed so far is the view of PNP Chief Eleazar, no, which I share, no, that kailangan intindihin naman natin na kapag ang mga volunteer groups ay merong banta sa buhay nila, meron din silang karapatan na depensahan ang kanilang mga buhay. Now, sabi nga po ni Chief PNP, we cannot allow these criminals. We cannot allow our volunteer groups to be at the mercy of criminal elements that we encourage them to fight alongside with us. No, so there's not a policy yet. I'm sure it will be subjected to full staff work. Pero meanwhile, may realidad na habang tumutulong ang mga volunteers, may banta rin sa kanilang mga buhay.
To Indonesia now, where the country's COVID-19 case rates have soared in recent weeks after millions traveled at the end of the Muslim fasting month of Ramadan in May, and as authorities identify the presence of highly infectious newer virus strains. Let's hear more from December Paras. December.
Indonesia has more COVID-19 active cases than any point in time since the pandemic began last year. The country, marked by overflowed hospitals and overstretched health workers, added more than 13,000 new active cases on Saturday, bringing up the total active cases to 196,776, or about 10% higher than its last peak in January. A new record high in daily new cases figure was after tests on 21,095 people came back positive for COVID-19 on Saturday. More than 56,000 people have died from coronavirus, with close to 2.1 million, or 0.8% of the country's population, and only 7,396 managed to recover from the disease. The situation was dire at the hospital. Hundreds of hospitals in Greater Jakarta have to treat the patients in hospital aisles and makeshift tents. Data from West Java's COVID-19 task force showed more than 100 hospitals now treating more COVID-19 patients in isolation wards and intensive care units. The bed occupancy rate in Jakarta hospitals was 93%. 9 in 10 beds in the capital's neighboring provinces were already full. West Java and Central Java reported they only have less than 10% of beds available. Health Minister Budi Gunadi Sadikin told the hospitals on Friday to convert their emergency rooms into isolation wards to treat the patients. A tent is built outside the hospitals for emergency service. Those who need treatment would enter the tents, as emergency rooms will be used to place additional isolation beds. The ministry has also decided to convert fully 3 hospitals under the ministry's authority in Jakarta to COVID-19 hospitals. Previously, only parts of the hospitals were designated for COVID-19 patients. Budi said he hoped the full conversion could complete by next week. Meanwhile, the head of the health department in Bogor, West Java, Sri Nowo Retno, said that many hospitals across Indonesia said they lack health workers to treat new COVID-19 patients. Almost all hospitals in the city reported some of their workers were unable to work in the past week as they caught COVID-19. Retno said many of the reinfected health workers had worked long shifts, increasing the chance of them being exposed to the virus, although many of them have been fully vaccinated. She said the only solution for the problem was for the city to increase the number of health workers. Still, Bogor found itself cornered in the market, competing for a limited number of candidates. The chairman of the Indonesian Doctors Association, or IDI Executive Board, Adib Kumaidi, said the pandemic had killed 350 nurses, 25 laboratory personnel, 43 dentists, 15 pharmacists, and 150 midwives since last year. 401 doctors have died due to COVID-19 by June, further stressing the country's underserved health system, which has only 4 doctors to serve 10,000 people before the pandemic. The government said to prevent more health workers dies in the pandemic, hospitals must prioritize treating the health workers before anyone else. If there are health workers who catch COVID-19, they must be served as well as possible. Still, Health Minister Budi Gunadi Sadikin remained confident that Indonesia could ride out the COVID-19 latest spike. Budi said, as long as we can work together, we should be able to overcome it. As long as the energy we have is focused on overcoming the pandemic, so we don't spend a lot of energy blaming each other. Back to you, CJ.
Thank you so much, December, for your report. Of course, we will be praying for a change in the trend of infection rates and death rates over there in Indonesia. Please do take care, December, and thank you.
Thank you, CJ. Stay safe too in Manila. Reporting from Jakarta, Indonesia, this is December Paras. We live in interesting times.
Back in the Philippines, the latest shipments of COVID-19 vaccines from the United States and China have been cleared by the Bureau of Customs, Ninoy Aquino International Airport, or BOC NAIA. Now, in a statement, the Bureau said the additional 1 million doses of Sinovac vaccines and the first batch of Moderna vaccines, consisting of 249,600 doses, have been released. The Chinese-made vaccines arrived around 7:20 in the morning on Monday at the NAIA Terminal 2 via flight 5J671 from Beijing and were immediately taken to PharmaServe cold storage facility in Marikina City. On the other hand, the Moderna vaccines consigned to the Department of Health arrived via flight number SQ918 at the NAIA Terminal 3 at around 11 p.m. Sunday. The shipment was pre-cleared at the BOC NAIA COVID-19 one-stop shop on June 25. The arrival of the first batch of American-made vaccines was witnessed by U.S. Embassy officials in the country, National Task Force Against COVID-19 Chief Implementer and Vaccine Czar, Secretary Carlito Galvez Jr., and Health Undersecretary Carolina Vidal Taino.
Staying here in the Philippines, Health Secretary Francisco Duque III administered the country's 10 millionth dose of COVID-19 vaccine to 74-year-old Nieves Katakutan in a ceremonial vaccination in Valenzuela City that highlights the government's vaccination program. Katakutan, a resident of Barangay General T. De Leon, Valenzuela City, received her first vaccine shot under the A5 priority or indigent priority group category of the vaccination rollout that started on March 1 of this year. The latest data of the National Task Force Against COVID-19 shows about 10,065,414 vaccine doses have been administered nationwide as of June 27. Of that number, 7,538,128 Filipinos have received their first dose, while 2,527,286 are fully vaccinated. The country's average jab rate over the last 7 days is at 236,867 doses across 1,231 active vaccination hubs. Valenzuela Mayor Rex Gatchalian thanked the national government for supporting the city's vaccination program. Duque, also chair of the Interagency Task Force for the Management of Emerging Infectious Diseases, commended the Valenzuela local government for utilizing around 80% of the more or less 250,000 doses of vaccines deployed in the city.
Ng China.
Swathes of the United States and Canada endured record-setting heat on Sunday, forcing schools and COVID-19 testing centers to close, and the postponement of an Olympic athletics qualifying event, with forecasters warning of the worst to come. On Sunday in Seattle, Washington State, the temperature hit 40 degrees Celsius or 104 degrees Fahrenheit, a record that surprised residents not used to warmer climates. Take a look.
This is very few times that we do close the market early. Most of the time of which we've ever had to close the market early is because of snow. And so because of the heat, I think this is the first time we've ever closed early because of the heat. It's heavily impacting the farmers. Right now, a lot of the farmers are worried about their crops being hydrated. And so as soon as they get done, they're going to be heading back out into their fields and helping their workers and or their family try to hydrate their crops and keep them, help them survive through this.
I mean, normally it's probably like maybe 60, 70 degrees is a great day. Everybody's outside in shorts and t-shirts. But this is ridiculous. I feel like I'm in the desert or something.
Yeah, it's hot. I mean, you just stand around and you're like, you can't breathe. It's so hot, at least for me.
Definitely have to wear shoes.
Yeah, the pavement, even grass, really you're just like, whoop, no thank you. Go back inside.
Climate change is a factor here, but definitely a secondary one. The main thing going on is this highly unusual weather pattern. But that being said, climate change is real. Our temperatures have warmed here. especially summer nighttime temperatures. And so that has just kind of raised the baseline and made this heat event that much more severe.
Because of climate change, record-setting temperatures are becoming more frequent. Globally, the decade to 2019 was the hottest recorded, and the 5 hottest years have all occurred within the last 5 years. Across the border in Canada, stores reportedly sold out of portable air conditioners and fans, while cities opened emergency cooling centers and outreach workers handed out bottles of water and hats. Several COVID-19 vaccination clinics were also canceled, and schools announced they would close on Monday. More than 40 new highs were recorded throughout British Columbia over the weekend, including in the ski resort town of Whistler. And forecasters said hotter days were to come.
In other news, China's National Space Administration yesterday released new images from its Tianwen 1 Mars probe. The footage shows the rover opening a parachute and descending to the Martian surface, and its rover Zhurong driving away from its landing platform and moving over the surface of the red planet. The launch on July 2020 of the Tianwen 1 Mars probe, which carried the Zhurong rover, marked a major milestone in China's space program. In the future, the rover will continue to carry out movement, perception, and scientific exploration of Mars, according to the China National Space Administration.
And the news continues here on Eagle News. We'll be right back.
This portion is brought to you by North Luzon Express Terminal.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
Aquino here at Hatley Castle, one of the filming locations for the X-Men series. Don't forget to tune in to Digital Nest only on Net 25.
Welcome back. Delayed second and third doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine boost immunity against COVID-19, according to a study by Oxford University, which developed the jab with a British-Swedish firm, and this was reported today. An interval of up to 45 weeks between the first and second dose of the AstraZeneca vaccine led to an enhanced immune response rather than compromising immunity, according to the study. Giving a third dose of the jab more than 6 months after the second dose also leads to a substantial increase in antibodies and induces a strong boost to subjects' immune response, said the preprint study, meaning that it has yet to be peer-reviewed. Now, this should come as reassuring news to countries with lower supplies of the vaccine, who may be concerned about delays in providing second doses to their populations, according to lead investigator of the Oxford trial, Andrew Pollard. He said there is an excellent response to a second dose, even after a 10-month delay from the first. The researcher said the results for a delayed AstraZeneca third dose were positive, particularly as nations with advanced vaccination programs consider whether third booster shots will be required to prolong immunity. He said it's not yet known if booster jabs will be needed due to waning immunity or to augment immunity against variants of concern. according to another study lead senior author, Teresa Lam. She explained that the research showed the AstraZeneca jab is well tolerated and significantly boosts the antibody response.
Shallow graves are emerging and bodies are floating down India's Ganges River as it swells with seasonal flooding. Most are believed to have died from coronavirus in April and May when India was hit by a spike in infections that overwhelmed hospitals in many areas. Take a look.
तमाम लाशें जो है वैसे फेंक दी गई और सब ऊपर ऐसे ही थी और उनको जो है अभी तो नगर निगम की तरफ से सुने थे तो जलाने का जो प्रावधान आया था। लकड़ियां देख रहे हैं सामने गजी है और उसके बाद पानी का स्तर बढ़ गया है और पानी का स्तर बढ़ने से अब सर ये जो कटाव है नदी का पानी का अब ये सब लाशें नदी में चली जाएंगे, उससे जो है फिर संक्रमण नदी में फैलने की संभावना है सर।
Now, Thailand today reimposed some coronavirus curbs to contain an outbreak. Let's hear more from Cristel Mapa, joining us live from Bangkok. Cristel.
Yes, Alma, Thailand from Monday will reimpose COVID-19 restrictions on restaurants, construction sites, and gatherings in the capital Bangkok and its suburbs as it tries to contain a wave of coronavirus cases. After a year of relative success in keeping infection rates low, Thailand's latest wave kicked off in April when a cluster was found in upscale Bangkok clubs typically frequented by the elite. Since then, more have been discovered in its overcrowded prison system, as well as among migrant workers who toil in its construction and service industries. The government said in order published Saturday that new restrictions will begin today, Monday, and last for a month. They include closing construction sites in Bangkok and surrounding areas, banning workers from living, prohibiting eat-in customers at restaurants, and restricting gatherings to a maximum of 20 people. Checkpoints will be set up in Thailand's southernmost provinces of Narathiwat, Pattani, Yala, and Songkhla. Travelers must carry a letter of intent to leave or enter. The new restrictions come ahead of the July 1st launch of a quarantine-free model for vaccinated tourists in the popular holiday destination Phuket. The so-called Phuket Sandbox has been touted as a way to resuscitate Thailand's crucial tourism industry and related sectors such as service, restaurants, and transport. Back to you, Alma.
All right, thank you very much, and let's hope that sandbox, Phuket sandbox there will go through on July 1. And it's quarantine-free travel, right, to Phuket?
Yes, it's quarantine-free, Alma.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you very much for your time, and we'll hear from you soon.
Thank you so much, Alma and CJ. Reporting live from Bangkok, Thailand, I am Cristel Mapa. We live in interesting times.
In other news, new coronavirus cases popped up in cities across Australia on Monday, prompting local authorities to impose restrictions in areas not used to living under strict COVID-19 rules. Australia has been broadly successful in containing virus clusters, but is now battling flare-ups in at least 4 cities across the vast continent nation. Take a look.
We are going to be living with COVID for a long time. There will be no eradication of this disease anywhere in the near time, and we need to make sure that we are observing all health advice. We are using all of those mitigation measures that I've spoken to before, but in particular, if you are eligible for a vaccine, please get yourself booked and get vaccinated. I mentioned we will be living with COVID for many years, not just many months and weeks, and I think all of these measures we can expect to see activated and then deactivated as we become more comfortable with the outbreak. But again, what we are trying to do with COVID is protect people's lives and keep people as safe as we can. So, the key metrics here are we managing to do that? And I think we will have to get more comfortable with the idea that there will be ongoing outbreaks in the COVID space. But with all of those mitigation measures, we can hopefully keep people alive, keep people from getting seriously ill, and then as quickly as we can transition back to as normal life as best we can. And vaccination underpins all of that. So again, getting vaccinated, really important to that.
Brisbane, Darwin, Perth and Sydney have all reported new cases of the highly contagious Delta variant, which first emerged in India and has spread in Australia after escaping from hotels used to quarantine returning travelers. The largest outbreak is in Sydney, where 130 people have tested positive for COVID-19 since a driver for an international flight crew was diagnosed in mid-June, with the city's residents now under stay-at-home orders for 2 weeks. A 48-hour lockdown of Darwin and surrounding areas due to end Tuesday was extended to Friday after a cluster linked to an outback gold mine grew to 7 cases. Northern Territory Chief Minister Michael Gunner said that for the first time during the pandemic, there were exposure sites in the city, which is home to a large indigenous population feared to be more vulnerable to COVID-19. Australia has recorded a total of just over 30,000 cases and 910 deaths in a population of about 25 million since the pandemic began. Officials have been quick to implement restrictions when clusters emerge, almost always after the virus escapes the hotel quarantine system. But the latest measures are among the most widespread since a nationwide lockdown in the early stages of the pandemic.
Back in Asia, Indonesia set a new record for daily coronavirus cases with more than 21,000 as hospitals are flooded with patients in Jakarta and other COVID hotspots across Southeast Asia's hardest hit nation. The figure brings the country's tally for the pandemic to more than 2.1 million cases with 57,138 deaths. Now, but the real number is believed to be much higher due to low testing rates for the deadly respiratory illness. Indonesia's COVID case rates have soared in recent weeks after millions traveled at the end of the Muslim fasting month of Ramadan in May, and as authorities identify the presence of the highly infectious newer virus strains. Fears are also growing that Indonesia's creaky health system could collapse, and there are reports of some overflowing hospitals being forced to turn patients away. Hospitals in the hard-hit capital Jakarta, as well as West and Central Java, have been flooded with patients, including those infected with a highly transmissible Delta variant first identified in India.
Now, fresh restrictions were also announced yesterday in South Africa, where President Cyril Ramaphosa said health facilities are stretched to the limit. The government of Africa's worst-hit country has banned alcohol sales and all gatherings except funerals. The overnight curfew has also been extended by an hour, and only takeaway is allowed at restaurants. Take a look.
Cabinet has decided that the country should move to adjusted alert level 4. The peak of this third wave looks set to be higher than the previous 2 waves. The first wave, if we recall, lasted 15 weeks. The second wave lasted nearly 9 weeks. We don't know how long this one will last, but indications are that it could last longer.
It is that a new variant seems to be not only arising, but it seems to start dominating the infections in South Africa.
Our scientists, after their sequencing experiments, have discovered that we have a new variant that is prevalent in our country. This new variant is called a Delta. You know that it's not a new in terms of existing only in South Africa. It exists in other countries. So nationally, the numbers have surpassed the first wave peak, and we are likely to surpass the second wave peak. We remain very worried about the rise in the hospitalization, which is putting a lot of strain in the health facilities in Gauteng.
Meantime, most business will forge ahead operating at full capacity, a move the president said was to enable as much economic activity to continue as possible. The economy of Africa's most industrialized country slumped by 7% in 2020 compared to the previous year. Health officials across the world have been alarmed by the rapid spread of the Delta variant. The World Health Organization said on Friday the Delta variant had reached at least 85 countries.
Meantime, all of Italy became a mask-free, low-risk zone for coronavirus on Monday, marking a dramatic milestone for the first European country to be hit by the global pandemic back in February of 2020. In a decree that took effect today, the Health Ministry for the first time classified each of Italy's 20 regions as white, signifying low risk under the country's color-coded classification system that evaluates COVID-19 risk. Now that means face masks will no longer be compulsory in outdoor areas. Welcome news across the country where an ongoing heat wave is expected to push temperatures past 40 degrees Celsius or 104 degrees Fahrenheit in some southern areas this week. Once a symbol of the coronavirus crisis in the West, where images of army trucks transporting coffins from the overflowing morgue in the northern city of Bergamo were seen around the world, Italy has seen COVID-19 infections and deaths plummet in recent weeks. A third of Italy's population over the age of 12 has been vaccinated as of Sunday, or 17,572,505 people, according to the government. Long prohibited from entering the country, tourists from the European Union, Britain, the U.S., Canada, and Japan are now back after the government removed a quarantine requirement for vaccinated visitors or those who test negative. And despite the progress, Health Minister Robert Speranza urged Italians to still be vigilant.
In other news, Ukraine and the United States launched joint naval exercises in the Black Sea in a show of Western cooperation with Kyiv as it faces off with Russia. The sea breeze drills, which have taken place 21 times since 1997, will involve some 5,000 military personnel from more than 30 countries. The exercises will last 2 weeks and involve around 30 ships, including the missile destroyer USS Ross. Ukrainian Navy Commander Alexei Nivpapa said during an opening ceremony in Odessa that the exercises would send a powerful message to maintain stability and peace in our region. The drills come just days after the British Navy's HMS Defender passed near Russian-annexed Crimea in the Black Sea, with Moscow saying it fired warning shots at the destroyer to ward it off. Russia said it fired warning shots last Wednesday at the HMS Defender after what it said was a violation of its territorial waters. Britain said it was making an innocent passage through Ukrainian territorial waters in accordance with international law. Russia annexed Crimea from Ukraine in 2014 and claims the waters around the peninsula as part of its territory. Most countries do not recognize the takeover and stand behind Ukraine's claims to the waters.
In other news, Peggy Hicks, Director of Thematic Engagement at the UN Human Rights Office, says that systemic racism against Black people has to be dismantled as she presents a UN report on racial justice and equality following the killing of George Floyd in Geneva. Take a look.
We need to step up, pursue justice, listen up, and redress. The call to step up demands that we stop denying and start dismantling systemic racism, recognizing that any hope of success depends on comprehensive, not piecemeal approaches to alter structures, institutions, and behaviors that contribute to discrimination against Africans and people of African descent in every part of life.
Now, this report comes 3 days after former policeman Derek Chauvin was sentenced to 22.5 years in prison for murdering George Floyd in Minneapolis in May 2010 or 2020. Footage of Chauvin kneeling on George Floyd's neck for nearly 10 minutes, indifferent to the dying man's groans, sparked global racial justice protests under the banner Black Lives Matter. After Floyd's death, the UN Human Rights Office was mandated in June last year to produce a comprehensive report on systemic racism, human rights violations by law enforcement agencies against Black people, and government responses to peaceful anti-racism protests.
In other news, U.S. airstrikes against Iran-backed armed groups in the Syrian-Iraqi border killed at least 7 fighters overnight into Monday, sparking immediate calls for revenge and fears of a new escalation between Washington and Tehran. The second such raid on pro-Iran targets since U.S. President Joe Biden took office, described by the Pentagon as retaliatory, came despite faltering efforts to revive a key deal over Iran's nuclear program. U.S. Defense spokesman John Kirby said in a statement that 3 military facilities used by Iran-backed militia had been hit, 2 in Syria and 1 in Iraq. Kirby said that the targets had been used by Iran-backed militias that are engaged in unmanned aerial vehicle attacks against U.S. personnel and facilities in Iraq. Kataib Hezbollah and Kataib Sayyid al-Shuhada, 2 Iraqi armed factions with close ties to Tehran, were among the several Iran-backed militia groups that had used the facilities, according to Kirby. U.S. interests in Iraq, where 2,500 American troops are deployed as part of an international coalition to fight the jihadist Islamic State group, have been targeted in more than 40 attacks this year. Eagle News will be back with more updates. Please don't go away.
Protect yourself and loved ones. Use Protect Plus Gold, a broad-spectrum disinfectant that kills 500 strains of bacteria, fungi, and viruses such as coronavirus and other disease-causing microorganisms. Also potent against viruses in pets. It kills 99.9% of disease-causing germs and works in 10 minutes. Dissolve 1 teaspoon in 1 liter of water. Apply on areas for disinfection or use it for misting. Protect Plus Gold.
Welcome back. Back here in the Philippines, Quezon City employees who reported for work during the enhanced community quarantine and modified enhanced community quarantine will soon receive their hazard pay. The local government has allocated 250 million pesos for the payment of hazard pay to eligible employees who help in the delivery of services and programs to residents during the covered period. All our workers on duty deserve to be fairly compensated for their sacrifices, especially since they face the inevitable risk of contracting the virus. That, according to Mayor Joy Belmonte, in a statement today referring to Ordinance SB 3025 or the grant of the COVID-19 disease hazard pay. Belmonte also said without dedicated employees, the city government will not be able to bring services to its constituents. The ordinance provides that employees who reported for work during the ECQ, MECQ will be granted a hazard pay in an amount not exceeding 500 pesos per day per person. A hazard pay of 200 pesos per day will also be granted to barangay officials, both regular and contractual.
The Philippine government commits to correct its deficiencies after the country returned to the gray list of the Financial Action Task Force, or FATF, an international watchdog that aims to combat money laundering and the financing of terrorism. This means we as a country made commitments to correct deficiencies within a particular time frame. Hence, it is under increased monitoring that, according to Finance Secretary Carlos Dominguez III to reporters in a text message. Aside from the Philippines, Haiti, Malta, and South Sudan also landed on FATF's gray list. In a separate statement, Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas Governor Benjamin Jokno said the country will submit its first report in September this year. He also said the Philippines has adopted compliant laws and regulations, but it is not sufficient. The Philippines needs time to implement them to demonstrate the effectiveness of anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing measures. He also added that although the Philippines was reverted to the dirty money watch list, the country will not face any sanction for being a jurisdiction under increased monitoring.
In a related story, Malacanang vowed to implement the government's action plans to address all anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing deficiencies of the country. Presidential spokesperson Harry Roque made this statement after the global dirty money watchdog Financial Action Task Force, or the FATF, has included the Philippines in its gray list of countries under increased monitoring because of its policies and laws against money laundering and terrorist financing. Take a look.
Wala pong countermeasures imposed. So wala pa pong desisyon. Ibig sabihin lang nito, increased monitoring. No? At tayo naman po ay nangako na ipatutupad yung ating action plan kasama po nung pag-amenda ng passage ng yung anti-money laundering at saka CTF laws, yung enhancement ng ating AMF at CTF supervisory framework, reinforcement of money laundering and terrorism financing investigation and prosecution, and campaigns to increase public awareness. So wala pa pong desisyon. They will monitor our progress. So we have not been put under any negative list. Pareho pa rin po tayo, but they want to see further improvements.
So he said inclusion in the gray list usually means a country will have to comply with recommended reforms within a given time frame before the imposition of sanctions. Inclusion in the FATF's gray list will result in additional layers of scrutiny from regulators and financial institutions, delayed processing of transactions, and clocking the country's road to an A credit rating.
In other business news, U.S. fast food giant McDonald's has announced plans to create 20,000 jobs in Britain and Ireland to help meet an expected boom in post-pandemic demand. Here's Patricia Rodriguez for that report. Patricia.
U.S. fast food giant McDonald's has announced plans to create 20,000 jobs in Britain and Ireland to help meet an expected boom in post-pandemic demand. McDonald's said in a statement published last Sunday that it will open 50 restaurants over the next 12 months as COVID restrictions ease. The U.S. group currently employs more than 130,000 people at 1,400 restaurants in Britain and Ireland. Paul Pomeroy, chief executive of McDonald's UK and Ireland, says that this is a fantastic opportunity for the company to be able to offer an additional 20,000 people work opportunities. He further added that there is no doubt that the pandemic has had a huge impact on many people's employment opportunities and threatened the future of high streets up and down the country. However, Pomeroy also cautioned over the weekend that McDonald's faced recruitment difficulties in line with the broader sector. He had admitted to the Sunday Telegraph newspaper the increasing difficulty of recruiting staff. Trade body UK Hospitality has warned of a staffing crisis due to the impact of pandemic travel rules and post-Brexit immigration. The British hospitality industry faces a shortfall of about 188,000 staff, according to the recent analysis from the trade organization. Reporting from London, United Kingdom, I'm Patricia Rodriguez. We live in interesting times.
And Japan's Olympic chief said there was no way to ensure zero virus cases among teams arriving for the Tokyo Games as officials prepare to tighten screening procedures. Japanese Olympic Committee President Yasuhiro Yamashita said thorough measures would be necessary at airports after 2 members of Uganda's team tested positive last week following their arrival in Japan. Take a look.
で、いくらどういうふうにやっても感染者が来ないということはないです。例えば柔道でですね、6月の上旬に世界柔道選手権大会がハンガリーで開催されました。私が得ている情報では、入国するときに3人の陽性者が出たというふうに聞いています。ですからそこは水際対策でそこでしっかり止めるということは大事だと思います。
But he hoped athletes would have positive memories of the games despite severe restrictions that mean they can't even leave the Olympic Village to buy souvenirs. Several high-profile athletes have already said they will not compete in Tokyo, with tennis star Serena Williams the latest to drop out on Sunday. Williams didn't give a reason for her withdrawal, but a ban on family members at the Olympics would have separated her from her daughter. Athletes must sign a written pledge promising to abide by antivirus rules in Tokyo, including staying away from tourist areas, shops and bars, limiting contact with other people, and not using public transport.
After more than 2 years of restoration work, the so-called hypogeum, or the area of the Colosseum that was below ground level, is unveiled and ready to open to visitors. The works, financed by Italian luxury shoe brand Tod's, shed a new light on what was the backstage area of the arena and allow visitors to retrace the near 400-year history of one of the most iconic monuments in the world. Take a look.
Frutti, ossia per la prima volta è stato possibile restaurare tutto l'impianto degli ipogei, che era il backstage degli spettacoli che si svolgevano sull'arena, e quindi consente al visitatore di ripercorrere la storia di circa 400 anni dall'80 d.C., il periodo, l'anno della inaugurazione del Colosseo, fino all'abbandono, fino all'ultimo spettacolo del 523 d.C. Quindi
The reopening to the public was announced Friday after meticulous restoration of the hypogeum, or below-ground area, with a new pathway offering intimate views and an app explaining the grisly details of the behind-the-scenes area. Sponsored by Italian luxury shoe group Tod's, the restoration began in 2018, involved 81 archaeologists, engineers, and others working to clean and reinforce the walls within the hypogeum, which stretches over half a hectare. The Colosseum was first completed in 80 AD and the hypogeum constructed under Emperor Domitian. The site was last used in 523 AD, and the hypogeum was gradually covered by rubble until being dug out in the 19th century. The labyrinthian system of passageways and chambers were key to the spectacles above ground, whether gladiator fights, hunts with wild African animals, or public executions. An imposing eastern tunnel led to a gladiator training camp, which included a hospital and morgue. Animals also entered the amphitheater via the tunnel before being caged. The project is due to be finished in 2023.
finally, here's MJ Racario for his showbiz update.
Hi, MJ Racario here. Here's a fan of James Bond 007. Well, Pierce Brosnan has a new film entitled False Positive. And I interviewed one of the cast members, Sainab Jah, award-winning actress. Let's listen in. And I really love your character as Grace Singleton. And how did you internalize your character as a midwife in False Positive?
I mean, in terms of how I internalized, I didn't think of her so much as a midwife, as someone who provides knowledge and comfort and guidance. But she's also, at the end of the day, she is a person who's good at her job, and she doesn't tolerate fools gladly. And she will set you straight if you misspeak and you come at her from a wrong place. She will tell you about yourself in no short order. So love that about her. She's very grounded and straight to the point.
Yeah, I really love that because it kind of adds a culture with the show, with the James Bond. Pierce Brosnan will be part of this False Positive. What was your reaction like?
I was really just, first of all, gobsmacked, as we say in England. I was gobsmacked, darling, absolutely gobsmacked. Just because I thought, oh, I love Pierce Brosnan in everything, not just as Bond, but even the Mamma Mia movies. The man can sing, he can dance, he can do almost everything. Loved him, and he's such a gentleman. And also, you know, the rest of the cast too. There's Justin Theroux and there's Josh Hamilton. And I also really got a thrill about the fact that there were so many theater people there as well, like people I've seen on stage in New York, like Josh Hamilton, like Gretchen Mol. I was super thrilled about the fact that I got to share a screen, or at least be in a project with them. And it was a beautiful, big, large cast, you know.
Yeah, that's amazing. So
you two need a little help. I will give you the best possible chance of getting pregnant.
after months of trying and failing to get pregnant, Lucy and Adrian finally find their dream fertility doctor in the illustrious Dr. Hindle. But after becoming pregnant with a healthy baby girl, Lucy begins to notice something sinister through Hindle's gleaming charm.
Really scary.
That is it for Showbiz Update. Until next time, MJ Racario here. We live in interesting times.
Here's Brosnan for the win. That's it for tonight's broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I am CJ Hero. We'll see you again tomorrow.
All right, and at the end of the day, there remains so much more to be grateful for. We'll see you back tomorrow. I'm Alma Angeles, and
we live in interesting
times.
This program is supported by Protect Plus Gold, a broad-spectrum disinfectant, kills 99.9% of disease-causing germs and works in 10 minutes.